Are you looking for the best gaming CPU? I have compiled a list of top 5 gaming CPUs this year. These CPUs are handpicked based on the overall design, hardware, customer reviews, and expert reviews. I will show each of the CPU's strengths and weaknesses. If you want more information and updated pricing on the products mentioned, be sure to check the links in the description down below. Okay, so let's get started with the video. To get us started, our top pick is the AMD Ryzen 5 3600. This is not just a great gaming CPU with serious multi-threading chops, it's also incredibly good value. The previous Ryzen 5 2600 remains a solid choice for the value-oriented PC builder, while stocks last and prices are low, but the Zen 2 architecture adds more than enough value to justify the latest and greatest chip. And while the Ryzen 5 3600X has a slightly higher clock speed than its non-X little brother, in games this translates to only a minute increase in frame rates for a decent chunk more money. With a 15% IPC increase over 2nd Gen Ryzen and Zen Plus, the Ryzen 5 3600 brings even more affordable gaming power to the mainstream market. At this price point, it doesn't just creep up close to Intel's gaming lead, it outruns it, and does so without demanding a bucket of power or pennies. And its multi-core/threaded performance makes it a great performer in areas other than gaming too. There's a caveat to all this though, which is the following. If you're comfortable with overclocking, and if you're in it mainly for the gaming performance, then the Core i5-10600K below might be a better bet. What we like: great value, fantastic single-core performance, multi-threaded. Coming up next, we have the Ryzen 9 5900X. The best high-end CPU is the AMD Ryzen 9 5900X. This 12-core, 24-thread beast is based on AMD's new 7nm Zen 3 architecture, and it's the best CPU you can get for gaming on a high-end setup right now. There is a more powerful Zen 3 CPU available in the form of a 16-core 5950X, but for gaming purposes, you're not going to see any tangible benefits from the $250 price increase. Both the 5950X and the i9-10900K slightly edge it in terms of performance, but you can't beat the value for a CPU in the high-end range here. The AM4 socket means if you were previously Team Red, you may not even need to splash out on a new motherboard, with Zen 3 support being given to last generation before 50 and X470 chipsets in the near future via a BIOS update, although you'll have to make sure your motherboard manufacturer has, or is planning to release, an update. And of course, this chip's unlocked for overclocking, so you can squeeze out even more power if that's your cup of the proverbial, although you'll want the best CPU cooler rather than the stock cooler if you're going to. What we like: 12 cores and 24 threads. Best value high-end processor. Future B450/X470 chipset support. Next up we have the Intel Core i9-10900K. The fastest CPU for gaming is the Intel Core i9-10900K. Intel's new Core i9-10900K is the world's fastest gaming CPU, but its painfully high price tag and TDP efficiency, or lack thereof, means it doesn't take the spot as the outright best CPU for gaming. But if money really isn't a thing for you, and if you have a monster CPU cooler, then the Deca-Core from Intel is the best processor to pair with your high-end graphics card. This super speedy CPU would pair great with an NVMe SSD. When it comes to GPU-bound games, which are the majority of titles, there isn't a huge amount of difference between the in-game performance of Intel's top chip and AMD's cheaper high-end CPUs, especially at 4K. It is a great chip from a technical and performance point of view, but as a value proposition, especially in the face of fierce competition from AMD, it's a bit of a tough one to recommend. What we like: the fastest gaming processor around. Perfect CPU for RTX 2080 Ti. Fantastic single-core gaming performance. The next pick on our list is the Intel Core i5-10600K. The best CPU for overclocking is the Intel Core i5-10600K. Intel's Core i5-10600K is a much better value proposition against the Ryzen 5 3600 and Ryzen 7 3700X than its predecessor, the Core i5-9600K, was. The 10600K is a genuinely great chip for the price, as it trounces over the 3600, 3700X, and often even the 3900X in games. The Ryzen 5 3600 still just about takes the title as the best gaming CPU, because it offers better multi-core performance in CPU-intensive apps, and because it's still a cheaper option, but the 10600K is justifiable if you have your eyes set on gaming alone. And if it's overclocking you're after, the 10600K is the best chip for it. It's super easy to get a few hundred megahertz out of this processor, and this translates directly into frame rates, putting it close, even to the 10900K. If you're in it purely for gaming and overclocking, the 10600K can't be beaten. If you have to choose between the 10600K and the 3600, ask yourself, am I comfortable slapping a good cooler on and overclocking? If so, the 10600K is probably the best choice for gaming. If not, stick with the 3600. What we like: serious overclocking, classic Intel gaming performance, best mid-range CPU for Intel motherboards. Our final pick is the AMD Ryzen 7 3700X. The best CPU for productivity is the AMD Ryzen 7 3700X. If you're after a mix of high-end multi-threaded computational chops, decent gaming performance, and great value, then look no further than the Ryzen 7 3700X. It's a well-priced Zen 2 CPU that drastically improves on the overall performance of its predecessor, the 2700X, and yet requires way less power. Importantly, it's also considerably cheaper than either Intel's or 8-core 9700K or i9-10900K. But it's still got gaming performance that's comparable with Intel's top chips when you're gaming at 1440p or 4K. That makes it a great chip in productivity terms and a CPU with gaming performance that is practically indistinguishable from the Intel competition in any GPU-bound game. What we like: serious multi-threaded performance, great value for a 16-thread CPU, top gaming performance.